I welcome you all, basketball degenerates, to another episode of the Pass First, Shoot Later podcast brought to you by the OC Basketball League. I'm your host, Zico Pepic, here with only one of my co-hosts, Michael Van Wyck. Omar is struggling with third world internet right now.
Yeah, how's it going? We miss Omar, but we'll be okay. We can cover for him. We got one he doesn't want to talk about anyways, probably.
I mean, Omar likes talking about anything, though.
That's true. You guys
Yeah.
don't get to see his antics. He's not walking on a treadmill. He's not cutting in and out.
I know he was upset that he couldn't be on the last episode, kept cutting out. When we had the episode with Kyle, he wanted to be there and mention his name as one of the greatest all-time shooters. And, you know, let us know. He's had a 50 spot here and there, chucking away. So,
You shoot enough, volume shooters. You gotta do what you do, right?
well, regardless of not having Omar here, I think we got a really interesting show today. Mike thought of a great topic that we've wanted to talk about, and it has to do with something that is near and dear to us. We grew up in an era of dynasties. The NBA, the history is rich with it. If you look at the Lakers dynasty with Magic, Jordan's dynasty with the Bulls, and Duncan and Kobe, their dynasties, although Duncan's kind of rattled off into three different decades. But I'll still count that since he got five rings. And then the Warriors with theirs, LeBron kind of falls in with the Duncan where it's
Yeah, I
fallen into
mean,
multiple ones. But
if you're going through it, I think from the beginning of the NBA, you've always had a history of dynasties. Like you said, back to the Lakers, before them, the Celtics. The Celtics won eight in a row, and I know less teams, easier competition, whatever, whatever, but they were still a dynasty and they kind of set that off. And then that moved into the Lakers. Then you had, some would consider the Bad Boy Pistons a mini dynasty within that timeline of the Lakers and the Celtics passing to Detroit and then quickly going into that Bulls dynasty, which then Jordan retired and you give Houston that little back to back. So you kind of have these mini ones that kind of go. And then, like you said, all the way through, LeBron James was kind of his own little dynasty, but on separate teams at different times. So I don't really think he's ever been a part of a dynasty team, just because even his team in Cleveland that went to what, four straight finals, they weren't winning. They were just kind of there. And as soon as he left or before he got there, they were nothing. And it was kind of just moved with him. So I think he kind of loses out on that. But then you go into Golden State. Um, Obviously, they've been the most recent dynasty, and I don't think there's any team right now because Golden State's at the tail end. So I think it's kind of the passing of the torch, and that's what Zico and I wanted to get into: is what team is going to be the next dynasty? Who's primed to take over? Is there going to be one of those? Is Denver just going to be a dynasty that steamrolls everyone as we're watching them now get back into playoff shape and ready to go? They've won nine of their last 10, four in a row. Or is this going to be, the start of the Celtics? Or is it going to be one of those um, Duncan Kobe timelines where there's a couple teams that go back and forth, or maybe there's no dynasty because these teams are pretty even now.
so I think one thing that we need to note about this is just how history has changed. You look at the standings right now in the West, and Golden State is sitting at 10th. They're on the verge of possibly even falling out of the play-in. The Los Angeles Lakers are sitting in ninth,
Yeah.
still also, in a situation where they could fall out. And even the Phoenix Suns, like you just have to keep Katie in mind, someone who's been part of a team that is considered that dynasty. And we're trailing him off at the end of his career where it's downhill at this point. And, you know, um, it's definitely a changing of tides. And I think it's a good conversation to have because You mentioned Boston, you mentioned Denver, those are like the obvious ones, but there's a lot of factors that come into this, and when you consider the fact that there are players that are aging, you consider the salary cap situations for all these teams. Um, there's probably going to be multiple teams that could also sneak in there, and we often gauge it by the amount of titles, a player can get. Like Jokic might be one of those guys who gets 4 or 5 titles. Jason Tatum might be one of those guys who gets 4 or 5 titles. There's a few other guys I feel like have the potential to lead a team into it. And then there's also just teams that are putting together situations where if they continue it, it's almost like the Heat culture type situation where they could be in a situation of we're going to be really good for a long time and we will be in that contention. So I think it's a great conversation to have. And yeah, I'm actually excited for this one, Mike.
But I think a lot of things that get lost though is you talk about dynasties and you talk about players, and some players are going to go on to be part of a dynasty, but that also starts with not only the culture of the team, but just the whole front office and how they're built. You look at Miami. For all intents and purposes, Miami is there every year. They're competitive in the playoffs, but they've never been a dynasty. I mean, they had a good run when they had Dwayne Wade, and then that went into LeBron James. And obviously, they did their back-to-back 4 straight finals, lost the 2 end caps. But no one would ever really say that the Miami Heat were a dynasty.
Right.
And then you look at players who can be phenomenal. Giannis, been an MVP multiple times. Everyone thought, hey, he's staying with Milwaukee. Milwaukee's going to be real good for a long time, and they have been really good. But no one's going to look back and say, oh, that was a dynasty team. I mean, they had a great coach that nobody knows why they got rid of him. You don't keep the same coach; it's hard to keep a dynasty going. I mean, every time we talk about a dynasty, typically those teams had the same coach for that given timeline, right? So keeping people together, keeping coaches together, keeping front offices, that's tough to do. I mean, you look at Golden State, they started with Mark Jackson as their coach, and that was the beginning, but that really wasn't. No one considers that the dynasty team, right? Once it unfolded and they got Kerr, Kerr is that Golden State dynasty. Now the front office was the same, a lot of the players were the same, but it took that change and then they got it to that next level. If Kerr goes away, dynasty goes away. Obviously, if Curry and Clay and Draymond, those guys start to leave and you see them at the tail end and those guys are starting to tail off, especially Thompson and Draymond this year, dynasty starts to fizzle. So just because you have a great player or a great whatever in play, you have to have all of those things come together, right? So I think the only team that kind of did it with multiple players, but they really didn't, would be the Spurs. But like you said, that had Duncan kind of across that whole thing, but it
And
started with
Popovich.
but I'm gonna say Popovich has been there the whole time. They have a chance to start over, right? They have Wemby and Heath. They could develop around him and restart a new era of their dynasty. The Lakers had multiple dynasties, right? The Celtics kind of had multiple dynasties, but none in this recent timeline, right? I think everyone thought they were going to get it together with their big three, and that turned out to just be a go-between. And there's teams like that that kind of upset and ruin dynasties, right? And that's setting off point, like Kawhi Leonard with the Raptors, going in there and getting one. It kind of took away from Golden State continuing on a bigger run. You have the random Pistons win to kind of break up those Lakers dynasties with in the middle there. Just random things that kind of just jump in there, right? Milwaukee, the 1 season, kind of disrupted anyone from getting momentum. So could just be a bunch of one-offs right now.
It could. I think there's different ways of looking at this right now, and we're not going to just talk of like the obvious ones that could be it. Boston and Denver are the two obvious ones that could be dynasty type franchises moving forward. But things that I want to focus on is teams like that, elite teams right now. Like those are two elite teams. They're both number one in their conference. But other things you're going to need to look at is teams that have good age built into the team. Like example being the OKC Thunder. They're all young, they're up and coming. They have a great coach, they have a great system, great organization that's building something. However, because of salary cap restrictions, you have to worry about will they be able to keep everyone, right?
But it's funny, just real quick, because March Madness is going on. I saw a funny stat. The starting five for North Carolina's average age was 22.2 years old. And the average age of the starting five for OKC is 22.6 years old. And it's like, so you look at that, it's like, okay, OKC, they have the coach, they have the youth, they have good players, they have all the things lined up, they have a great front office from everything you hear. But now it's that next step. Do they have players that are willing to work their salary to remain a dynasty, right?
Right.
Or to become a dynasty? I couldn't say to remain a dynasty. I mean, they had the chance the first time and fell apart. Kevin Durant went one way, Harden went one way, Westbrook went one way. So can you do the things? Can you keep everyone happy? There's so many things that play into this. You have to continue to draft, right? You have to continue to develop players, but you have to have a core.
The other thing that you need to consider is, do you have a player that you can build around? You know, like the one thing about like Duncan, the Kobe's, the Shaqs, the Jordans, you know, like when you have guys like that that you can put a team around, you gave your LeBron, you have a chance to win a title every single season because of them. And we're looking at this next generation of young players and we're thinking which one of these guys has the capability of being the best player on a title contending team and putting their team in a title contending situation every year going forward. And like Wemby is going to be one of those guys. We both truly feel that, like where he in a couple years he's going to be that good that him just being there and healthy, that team is going to have a chance to win a title. And you know, because of the Spurs situations and the way they build teams and the way Pop develops players, he's going to have a cast. He's going
Mhm.
to have a supporting cast. It's going to help him get there as well. You know, regardless of this season, it's growing pains. It's fine. We all see that the talent is there. So I think that if we look at it from that standpoint of teams that are there now, that are in the position of they might be like Denver already won one, Boston is right on the cusp of possibly winning one. If we look at teams like that, if we look at teams that have interesting salary cap situations and maybe they don't have star players, but they have like superstar players, but they have cores that are just built together to grow up with. And then the teams with that superstar that could lead them in a situation like that if that star reaches that next level. So I think that's the tiers that we're going to be looking at today. If you agree with me, Mike. And
Mhm.
and again, let's start with Boston and Denver, and let's pick apart some of the pros and cons and what could be reasons they do become dynasties, and what could be reasons that keep them from becoming dynasties. Is there a team you want to start with first, Boston or Denver?
Let's go with Denver because obviously they're the ones who have the chance to start to go back to back. And I think that
By the way, they are number one in the West now. They actually are
yeah, yeah,
half a game ahead of OKC now.
yeah, that's what I said. They're getting into that playoff form, and I think to start any dynasty, and I shouldn't say to start that because, like we've mentioned, there's some that kind of go every other, like the Spurs went every other for a while. But getting that back-to-back championship, and they were the year before, not in the championship, but just outside competing with, Phoenix. They lost. I think they were injured, right? Jamal Murray missed the two in a row. So you see that start, you see that growth, and then they win. It's like, okay, now they've won. Now can they do it again? And now that the season's coming, to a close, they're starting to get to that form where it's like, okay, we're going to start ramping up. We're going to start working on rotations. And I think that for all intents and purposes, they're the team that everyone's looking at as, okay, we're going to pass the torch. They're going to be the next big dynasty, right? You have the player who's won two MVPs in a row, is going for a third MVP. He's the front runner right now. I mean, the guy, Joker's amazing. He's, unstoppable. It may look unorthodox or it may not be as pretty as watching Kevin Durant shoot or whatever it may be. He gets it done. He does what he needs to do. And he's the cornerstone, right? But then you have the four, you have the Jamal Murray, um, you have a shooter and Ford Jr. who's sitting there. But I think the biggest thing that really put him over the edge that's going to keep him is getting those veterans who are not superstars, but could have been, right? If they stayed on a
KCP.
team. Not KCP was never going to be a superstar. He's a
No, but he's a
he's guy,
good
but
veteran
he's a
role player.
core guy. But I was talking about Aaron Gordon. I think Aaron Gordon's the breaking point of that team. He's the
Agreed.
Draymond Green type, right? He could go somewhere else and do a lot more than he's doing in Denver, but he's never going to have the career of winning if you're off on your own, right? You have to find those guys that buy in. I think every single dynasty has had that on top of a good coach, on top of a superstar. You have role players, but then you have a guy that's really good that can go do big things, but just accepts this role because he wants to win. He's that veteran, he's that leader, and Aaron Gordon does all that. And I think he's one of the most underrated parts of that Denver team. So I think they have everything they need to become that dynasty and still compete year in and year out. They're relatively young. I think Joker's just getting into his prime. I think he's going to continue to improve from where he's at for 2, 3 more seasons before he kind of peaks and really starts coming down. But the one thing that Joker has that most of these superstars don't is he doesn't rely on athleticism, right? No one's out there. He watched him in the All-Star game. He missed a dunk. He's 17 points from dunk, right? I mean, I know he can, but he's not sitting there relying on these things. So his career, his peak is going to last a lot longer than I think a lot of people are expecting because he knows how to play. He's plays smart. He's physical, but he's not overly reliant on athleticism. You pair that with KCP, the Jamal Murray's. They got a great coach. They just got some young guys in there that have that energy, that run, that shoot, that play the role and buy in. And I think that they can continue to dominate on that side.
So one thing I really want to point out with this team, and I think this is going to surprise some people because the way this team plays, you would think that they're just an older veteran team, but there's only 4 guys on this roster that are over 30. And KCP, who's their main guy in that starting group, is actually only 31 years old. Jokic is 29 years old. Aaron Gordon is 28 years old. Jamal Murray is 27. Michael Porter Jr. is 25. And then even if you want to add somebody in there, Christian Braun, who I think is going to be part of this core going forward, is only 22 years old. This team is still young. They have great pieces, although I think their depth did hurt a little bit this season. Just losing Bruce Brown. They still have the infrastructure to build this thing going forward where even as KCP ages right now as well, Reggie Jackson, who's 33 years old, he's gonna be needed to be replaced at some point. But you could easily replace him with another backup point guard. They're all over the place in the NBA at this point. As KCP ages, Christian Braun moves into that starting lineup as the starting shooting guard. Just gonna do the dirty work, play defense, hit the open 3-pointers, be the 3-and-D guy for this team. The way they're structured, they have the ability to be really good for the next 5 years. And if they could be good for the next 5 years, they have the opportunity to be a dynasty team. And I think that's why we're looking at this team as this one title. It isn't a fluke. You know, some people might think that. In fact, a lot of people thought that. The amount of disrespect that the Joker got was just horrible, especially ESPN. It just blew my mind. They were denouncing this guy. He shouldn't have been MVP, shouldn't have done this. The amount of hate this guy got blew my mind. Fundamentally, he's
But
one of
that's his fault.
yeah,
Part of
right.
that's his fault because
I know.
I mean, he sits there and says he doesn't say he hates playing basketball, but he's like, "Ah, that's a job. I don't care. It's not what I
Right.
want to do. I'm just
Right.
good."
He's just having fun with it. That's the
Right.
reality. And you
Yeah.
know what? The guys who do there's two type of guys that end up being the best players in the NBA. Guys like that who don't take it too seriously, but are just really good. Shaq was like this. Shaq was joking around left and right. He loved to compete, but he had fun with it because he realized he has the opportunity to get paid millions upon millions of dollars to play basketball. And then there's the other end of guys who are like hardcore, they're focused, like Kobe and Duncan. They were hardcore focused. They wanted to perfect their craft. Like they dedicated their lives to making sure they were the best at the best of all those little things in basketball. I think those two types of players are all you'll ever want. And I think Jordan might have been a mix of both of that. You know, he was like right in between, which was just like That's why
Yeah, I
everyone
think
thinks so,
his
you know?
Jordan's was more on court, off court, right?
Right,
On court,
exactly.
he was die hard, do
Killer
everything
and
I need
off
to
court,
do.
you
Off
know,
court,
like
he
me even
was
on court. Like, do you remember those videos where like he'd be messing with players all the time? Like guys have their hand out guarding him, they turn their head, he's sitting there tickling their hands, messing with them the whole time, you know, like things like that. Like he would still do it on the court too. So, yeah, I think Jokic is that. He whether people want to accept it or not, he is that. He's going to be talked about as one of the greatest at the end of his career, and especially if he gets at least one more title, I'd be willing to bet he will.
yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the things he does, like we've covered it in several podcasts at this point, right? I mean, he's for all intents and purposes an unstoppable player. I think that the one thing, I shouldn't say the one thing. Obviously, there's 29 one things that can keep them from becoming a dynasty, and that's other teams. I think there's a lot of young teams out there that have the potential that if they can stick together and grow and continue to improve, that's going to be the thing that stops Denver from becoming a dynasty is being interrupted by other teams.
Okay, so let's use that as the segue to move on to the Celtics.
Right. And that's what we're gonna do, right? Is
Okay.
we go right into Boston here. And Boston's that team that was young, that had
Only
their
one player over the age of 30, and that's Drew Holiday at 33. Like,
and
sorry, we
he's
also have Al Horford, 37.
yeah. And they had all the pieces. They were chipping away. They were just short, just short. Okay, last year they got there and fell just short to, you know, each time, but they've gotten better. And no can, you know, Tatum and Brown play together. You got to separate them. Well, we're not going to separate them. And then they get over the hump. And then now they have Kristaps. Is he the last piece to go with Drew Holiday to get them there? And it's like they've slowly built together all these pieces and they have the history of making a dynasty where it's we can't get there, we can't get there. Okay, we got to the next step. We can't get there, we get the next step. And now if they win a championship this season, which I think we've said numerous times, there are teams in the way, but I've said it and I'll say it again. I think the East is a cakewalk for them to get to the finals. Um, Obviously, a few exceptions. There are games that would be harder, but if they go in there and win a championship and stop Denver from winning a championship, or Denver doesn't get there on their own, uh, other teams we can talk about later that can interrupt them. But if you stop Denver from getting a championship and you win one this year as Boston, and then you continue to improve and you get there again next season, then you become that dynasty, right? And you're the passing of the torch. And Denver's one win is kind of just a blip in the radar, or the Toronto Raptors of 2018 or 19, whenever they won. I don't remember, but you completely erase right that history of that team becoming that dynasty and become your own dynasty. Like you said, they have a very young team. They obviously have the superstar. They have two superstars, and then they added that, like I mentioned for Denver, the Aaron Gordon. They added that with two players, with Drew Holiday and Kristaps. Those are both veterans that are had chances to be superstars on other team. Kristaps tried it on other teams, but could never stay healthy. Now he's taking I don't want to call it a reduced role because he's a starter, but it's a reduced role from what he's used to. He doesn't have to be the guy, right? So maybe that can keep him healthy. Then you got Drew Holiday, who has been there, he's played, he's won, and now he's on this team, and can he be that veteran presence that shows them the way to win and just kick this off, right? The only thing that I would say with Boston, their biggest problem is they can't keep a coach.
I don't think that's their biggest problem, Mike. There's some numbers I got to point out right here, because there's always something that works against you that you have to consider, and that's the salary cap. And I think the biggest mistake that Boston actually made was giving Jaylen Brown the supermax contract that they gave him. Not to say he's not deserving of it. However, when teams decide that they're going to have two supermax players, which right now it's only Jaylen Brown because Jason Tatum's contract is going to expire after next year. And then he does have a player option, which obviously he's not going to sign. He's going to go for another super max, just like Jalen Brown did this last season. Um, the second teams have two supermax players, they start having financial issues in keeping a balanced roster out on their team. And as an example, next season, with they're going to have most of this current roster still intact. This season they're at $183 million salary cap. Next season they're going to be ballooning to $199 million salary cap. That's because Jalen Brown's max contract starts kicking in. After that, you're going to have two max contracts in Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum, which are going to cover over $100 million in their two salaries alone.
When's the new CBA?
I think after this season, it's going to start kicking in. So
And how much does the cap go up?
the cap actually only goes up 10 million. So that's
Okay, so not much.
it's not much. And obviously that could change within every year. It could go up little by little. But again, if you have two players covering over $100 million, it's going to be well over $100 million because at that point, Jason Tatum's max salary cap is going to be higher than what Jalen Brown's was. You're probably looking at $110 million being covered for two players. So if the max salary cap is hanging around, let's say $150 million, you're already going to be cut short. They're paying luxury tax right now. They're trying to win a title, which is great. And I think that the one worry I have with this team is, will they be able to build a formidable roster around those two, especially? And you're still going to have Porzingis there in 2 years, or will they have to pause? Or I won't say will they have to, or will Jason Tatum look at the signs and decide it's time to go the second his salary expires, which he will
And
be an unrestricted free agent?
that's talking to what's going to keep Boston from becoming a dynasty, right? Let's say they do all the things that I just said. 2 years go by, they win back-to-back championships, right? We're just pretending hypothetical here. And then they can't get the roster together anymore because they got too many expensive players. That's how things end. That's how things collapse, right?
You're going to have to repay Porzingis and Derek White.
Yeah, and this has happened multiple times, but it's not always just money issues. I mean, you look at egos. I think egos is a big thing that gets in the way a lot of it. It happened with Kobe and Shaq. Let's pretend Kobe and Shaq got it together and didn't hate each other for whatever those 2, 3 seasons were. And Shaq doesn't go, well, I know it's that too.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. It's a combination of money, egos, wanting to do more, wanting to prove things. You set that aside and Shaq never goes anywhere. Kobe and Shaq are probably winning more. I mean, Kobe probably gets less finals MVPs because then he wins 2 more championships with Shaq, right? Maybe they win 5 in a row. Who knows?
Kobe
Who's
would have
pretending
those
here?
finals MVPs at that point, just like Wade.
Yeah, exactly. That's maybe. Who knows? We're playing hypotheticals.
At that point, Shaq had started, like even in the Detroit.
I get it. We're just playing. We're playing pretend here.
The
So
one thing to keep a note of at that time, it was a little different. You could not have two max contract players on your team.
yeah,
So
they had different deals.
yeah, it was
and they
different.
wanted money, but they
Right.
also had problems with each other.
Right. I think at that time, like Shaq got his 130 million, and like the next highest contract Lakers could have on their roster was like 65 or something like that, which would have gone to Kobe. But had Kobe left the team and gone somewhere else, he would have been eligible to get like 90 million. So like that was the situation. And Shaq didn't want to go 90-90. Shaq wanted 130.
Yeah, ego.
We wanted more than 65. I get that because that's kind of, again, this might happen with Tatum and Brown right now because if they both take it, which they should, they won't be able to have, Drew Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, Derek White, Al Horford, Peyton Pritchard. Like they won't be able to pay all these guys on the roster.
Al Horford's probably going to be done in 2 seasons,
right? But they won't be able to replace Al Horford for somebody. Al Horford right now is making $10 million. Like they won't be able, well, they will probably will for mid-level, but Derek White's making $19 million.
But regardless, they're not going to be able to get all those guys. Right. They're not going to keep it
Drew
together.
Holiday's making $40 million. They won't be able to replace. So
you'd have to convince all of these guys to take a cut and want to do it and stay at that same level or same abilities or find a replacement. And that's hard to do. And that's why front office comes into it and all these other things. So I think
And Drew might do that. Drew Holiday might do that if he's happy there, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, like you said, that's what's keeping Boston from probably progressing into a dynasty that they've seen Boston be in the past. I don't think it's as much competition. Obviously, competition is going to be the biggest thing for all of them because I think there's, 4 or 5 teams on here that could become legitimate every season contenders. Um, and those are the big two we start with. The next ones I think is more because of, and this is a terrible transition, but I'm just going to go into it, is an LA team. And I think the Clippers have a chance of doing this, not because of just the players, but because of their owner. I think if there's a guy who wants to build a dynasty and do it by any means necessary, Ballmer has all the money in the world, right? He's gone and spent it. He's brought in current high profile players, past high profile players. He's gotten guys to buy in. I think Tyronn Lue's a good enough coach to keep people, even keeled. The big thing is keeping people healthy. And I know they're an older team, but they got all these guys, and Ballmer will go spend the money. He can maybe pick apart and, hey, you got James Harden going away because he's getting old. Maybe he's, just getting over the hill and you need to replace him. And he says, hey, Tatum, I'll pay you the money. Hey, Brown, I'll pay you the money. I don't care about luxury tax and all of this. I'll pay you whatever it is. And when your time comes up and it's the end of your career, I'll pay you again. He's the type of guy that would do that. And I think that they have a possibility, but their detriment is they're still the Clippers. So
They're still the Clippers, and then a few things to point out. James Harden is currently 34 years old. Kawhi Leonard is currently 32 years old. Paul George is currently 33 years old. These guys are actually at the point where they are trailing down past their prime.
yeah.
And although I do think Steve Ballmer is the kind of guy that would absolutely retool the roster and pay the players that he needs to win a title, especially when he gets the new stadium that he's putting together. I think that he will do that. He's willing to do that.
Into it, that place looks amazing. I don't know if
Yeah,
you've been in that area, but
it does. It's going to be amazing. I'm happy for them, honestly. So I think again that he's the kind of owner, like we talk about players, but he's the kind of owner that would be willing to do that. I think that right now, though, looking at the Clippers, they're the kind of team that they're the spoilers. They're gonna ruin someone's dynasty to me more so than they're going to actually be
yeah, no,
dynasty. But I absolutely see them being a spoiler to someone's dynasty, whether it's the Nuggets, whether it's the Celtics. Like they could absolutely do it, and in fact, like they could be the kind of team that not only spoils it, but even like destroys it. They could be the kind of team, like, let's just say they met the Celtics in the finals, like to the point of like Tatum's like, this is not enough. I need to leave somewhere else because of situations like this.
I mean, Kawhi Leonard has done that at multiple stops,
Yeah.
right? He won with the Spurs, and all of a sudden LeBron was going back to Cleveland. He won with Toronto, and all of a sudden Durant was leaving Golden State. Maybe he wins here, and all of a sudden Jamal Murray or, like you said, Tatum decides they need more. I don't know if Jamal Murray would. That doesn't make any sense because I don't think you're getting much more than Joker. But yeah, absolutely, I could see that. He could be that anti-hero his whole career, right?
Okay, so I'm going to mention two other teams in particular, and we talked about teams that have superstars. I think Tatum and Jokic are the kind of guys they could be the best players on a championship team and be the number one type of guys, face of the league type of players. I'm going to look at two teams that are in different situations, and that's going to be the OKC Thunder and the New York Knicks. In particular because they don't have a player as talented as Jokic or Tatum. I love SGA. I love SGA. I just don't think he's on. I don't think he's not at the level of a superstar. I'm gonna take this team on my back, win a title.
Yeah.
I think he can lead a team and be an MVP. I just think those two things are a little different.
Okay.
So that you
But they
go
also have Chet.
Right. I know. So like that's what I was thinking as well. Like I'm looking at these two teams as teams that are doing everything right. And I talked about this earlier in the season. And this is a management standpoint of we're going to put we're going to be financially responsible. We're going to put the right players into the system. We're going to put them right around the right coach. We're going to put the right players around this coach that we chose to build this system. And I don't think any team right now has done this better than these two teams. And it kind of started with certain things. Now, SGA did get the Supermax contract. I think Chet probably will get close to that. Maybe not a Supermax, but he's going to be up there.
He's
Uh,
going to have to.
yeah, he's going to have to. But the way that they've been funneling money like nonstop and with draft picks where they could get rid of money at any point that they want, I'm pretty sure they're going to be easily be able to pay for all four of those main guys that they have without an issue. In fact, five guys. Lugens Dort is like one of those guys where he's going to be just a middle of the cap salary and he's going to be happy with it because he's a 3-and-D guy and he's going to do what he needs to do to stop players where he's never going to be a max contract player. And I don't see any other team paying him to be that.
Yeah.
Um,
He's not a guy you steal away to come be your cornerstone,
exactly.
but he
Exactly.
is very, very good.
And that's kind of like these two teams are kind of like that. They don't have any players where like I have to steal that player away just to ruin them. Like teams will want to steal Tatum away, or even Jalen Brown, or even Porzingis just to ruin that dynasty. Teams are going to want to go for Aaron Gordon to ruin that dynasty. I don't feel like these two teams have players where it's like, let me take that away and ruin this dynasty because I think these teams are like plug and play players. It's like, all right, well, if you could do that, we'll plug this new kid that's up and coming right into that system. We'll be fine. So, yeah, with the Knicks, it kind of started with Julius Randle. Julius Randle had multiple offers to get much more money than he took. Julius Randle's making like $28 million a year right now. And he had offers for $40 million. He said, I'm going to take less because I want the team to be better. What did the team do? They went and signed Jalen Brunson, who signed a $100 million contract when he probably could have gotten double that. He didn't. When you have your two best players who are taking mid-level money,
A little more than that, but yeah,
a little
yeah.
more than that, right? Well, right now it's about 50 million. So Jalen Brown is making $53 million a year. When you have your two best players doing that, when you have a roster full of guys that want to play together, you have that Villanova connection with Josh Hart, with DiVincenzo, you have all these guys that are gelling. Mikal Bridges is like dying to move from Brooklyn to New York and play for that team because his boys are all there. When you start putting situations like this together, you have a team that is financially responsible, has amazing depth, is plug and play. If one player leaves, they have another player to fill in. Mitchell Robinson, who is one of the best defensive centers to start the year, gets hurt. Here comes Isaiah Hartenstein, starts and has been the best rebounding and shot blocking center in the NBA since the start of this year. I don't know if you've looked at that stat. I could get you the exact
Mhm.
number soon if you'd like to look at it. It's actually
I
pretty
believe you.
impressive. So I look at these two teams as maybe they're more of like the Clippers. I'm going to ruin your dynasty type. But if they can maintain this, they could be the kind of team that they win 2, 3, possibly even 4. I don't think they will, but they could be one of those teams that's in that conversation as the Houston Rockets were in that Jordan era. The Detroit Pistons were in that Kobe Duncan era. So
So, and okay, so OKC, we know is young. We've talked about their youth, and they have a guy who's in the MVP rankings, and they have a rookie who's in the Rookie of the Year rankings, and they have, Dortz, and they have these other guys that are just good enough to be those key pieces, right? So OKC, you can see naturally developing into that. Through the draft. New York, you said, kind of built theirs, right? They've kind of picked pieces from different teams and they've got it together and they've built this. Um, I don't see, and it'll be a big proving ground in the playoffs this year if New York got it right. New York's doing the right things in the regular season. They're staying where they need to. Yes, they've had injuries. They haven't had any major injuries, right? But they've had injuries. You'll see where they're at in the playoffs. I think they kind of, I mean, I brought up the Clippers, and the Clippers, I think they're Like you said, I don't realistically think they'll be a dynasty with the team they have. I think they just have an owner who's spending the money. I think that New York at best is playing spoiler. I think they would be a tough, matchup for Boston. I think Boston would ultimately win that. But I don't think the Knicks, as built with where they're at and the way they've gone, I don't think they're becoming a dynasty, right? They fall into that same category of the Knicks are the Knicks, the Clippers are the Clippers. They're going to continue to do what they maybe they get there, and they're always going to fall short, right? If you called the Knicks a dynasty during their Patrick Ewing days, that's just because you're a Knicks fan and you wanted to
They
latch
were.
on to something, right? Exactly, they weren't. But that's what they're going to say. Oh, the Knicks dynasty with Ewing and Starks. That's kind of where I see the Knicks now. Is you got the dynasty during Randall and Brunson, right? They're good, but they're not getting there, in my opinion. Now the playoffs come, they run through the playoffs, maybe changes everything, and then got to come back here and say Zico was right, I was wrong, and we go from there. Um,
By the way, closest the Knicks ever came to this is they actually had their two titles in 1970 and 1973. It's during the Walt Clyde Frazier days, and he was the guy on those teams. So I could see this team being something like that. They're kind of giving me that vibe. They're giving me heat culture type vibes. Like again, the way they're building, like I don't think they could just be spoiler. I think they could win a title, surprise everyone. But I think something like that's more realistic. Like one, definitely could see it. Two, I'd be pretty impressed, but I wouldn't be surprised. Three, I'd honestly be shocked.
I think most teams, if you three-peat now, the way the NBA is set up and the way the talent spread, I think if you three-peat, you're doing something incredible, right? There's been two teams that have three-peated. Anyway, if we don't count Boston's eight, right?
Lakers and Bulls.
Lakers and Bulls. I mean, I think for as much as we've been on here and talked about, top players of all time and past greats and blah blah blah, I don't think anyone counts the eight in a row. It's eight in a row, right?
With 8 teams in the league at that point.
Yeah, yeah. Um, with that said, I think from where we're at in the NBA, I think the teams that we've already discussed are about it as far as built could become dynasties teams. But I think there are um, I mean, we didn't really talk about the Spurs. We kind of mentioned Wemby and Popovich, and they could build on it. But I think there's players out there that are on teams that could go to a dynasty. I don't think the team they're on will become a dynasty. And the team that pops to mind for me is Minnesota. I don't think Minnesota, because they're Minnesota, is going to be a dynasty team. Cat is good. Anthony Edwards is great. You guys have been both you and Omar have talked about Anthony Edwards to extent, right? What he can do, what he's capable of, how he's growing, how he's maturing. I think he's getting a lot more recognition now. He's the type of guy, and I say this, but it's not going to be realistic. But let's say he goes to San Antonio, and now you have Anthony Edwards and Wemby. Put 2, 3 guys around them that just want to play a role, and then now you have a dynasty, right? And it's not that simple. Obviously, they got to accomplish things. They got to get things done. But he's the type of guy that can go somewhere. And even Cat, Carl Anthony Towns, let's say he goes, somehow miraculously to Dallas. And you got Luka and Carl Anthony Towns with, their younger guys and Kyrie to kind of guide them and show them the way and how to win. So I think there's a lot of guys like that in the league that are playing for small market teams or that are just one move away, right?
So I
But
definitely agree with that, Mike. I think my thing is I'm sorry, with Anthony Edwards is I don't think Anthony Edwards is going to stay in Minnesota.
I
I
don't think
think
so.
he's the guy that's primed to leave. And maybe and then here's the other thing. I mentioned OKC, I mentioned the Knicks. The other thing about these two teams in particular is they have so many assets. Like they have the two most draft picks out of any team in the league, more first rounders than any other team. Anthony Edwards decides I want to be traded. Which two teams have the best assets to get him? It's literally going to be OKC or the Knicks. They have so much to offer the Wolves in terms of draft picks and players they can attach to them. Knicks can literally offer Anunoby and 5 first-round draft picks, unprotected, and Minnesota has to consider that at that point. And maybe it's Anunoby and Mitchell Robinson, but they do it because they're going to bring a superstar into the fold with Brunson and Randall. And now they have a legitimate chance to be a dynasties type roster. Same thing with OKC. Imagine SGA and Anthony Edwards on the same team. You
Yeah,
know,
with Chet.
exactly. It'd be dangerous. It'd be fun to watch. It'd be elite. So those are teams like I always say, keep in mind in situations like that. But Anthony Edwards, absolutely, I think he could be the face of a franchise on a title contending team. And
But that could also be James Harden and PG3 are too old. Let's bring in Anthony Edwards. Kawhi can show him the way. Let's spend a lot of money. And
yeah,
that's
but
what
they
I
don't have
meant.
the draft picks to make that work, man.
Right. But
Yeah.
people become free agents. But
You
that's what
have
I'm
to
saying is
think. You have to think.
Balmer would pay for these things.
Right.
That's the only reason I consider the Clippers anywhere relevant is because Balmer's made it very clear he's willing to spend money. But
Yeah.
like you said,
I
most
think he
teams,
would go to like a big time city. Like I think
yeah,
he'd LA or he'd want, the
New
New
York
he
or
wants
yeah,
he wants the or Miami. Like and he'd God, heat culture would he fit there amazingly.
OKC's biggest detriment is they're in OKC. And that's realistically San Antonio. Like if Anthony Edwards went there for some draft pick, whatever, let's say you get, but he didn't want to. No one wants to go to San Antonio.
No, I
I mean,
agree.
they built through the draft. They're going to have to continue to build through the draft. They're
And
probably
that
going to
could be
get
an
a
issue with them with Wemby. Wemby might decide he wants out because, when Pop retires, which eventually is
And
going to.
that's going to be the big thing. I mean, the only thing that San Antonio has going with him for Wemby is Tony Parker probably vouches for him, and they have that whole France thing, and Pop is there. He can keep him there. They're probably going to get a decent draft pick this season, but draft isn't that great this year. So
By
I
the way,
mean, you got to figure
I
out a
got
lot of
I
things.
gotta say this. Are you not surprised that, San Antonio drafts a French kid um, who's going to be the best European player, could possibly be the best European player to ever play. And he literally could end up being this. And you come to a place like San Antonio, like you just talked about, a place that no one really wants to play. Are you not surprised that they didn't push a little harder to get some of his French buddies on that team? Like Evan Fournier was on the Knicks and he was just dangled around for a trade for so long. How was it that San Antonio didn't go and get Evan Fournier just to have him next to Wemby, just for like some comfort? Or even Gobert, when Gobert was available and he's coming, why didn't you go get some of those guys to say, like, hey, we know San Antonio sucks, but your buddies are here. Like, get comfy.
My guess is so he can experience growing pains. He can play with guys that want to be in the spotlight that aren't really ready for the spotlight. He can see what it takes and how other people can try to take things away and how to grow within that. They get a good draft pick and then they make some moves. They can get, some other French guys. They can make some moves. If I mean, let's spin this back and you look at go back to Minnesota and how they've had Kevin Garnett and then he went away and that team fell apart. They had Kevin Love and he went away and that team fell apart. If Anthony Edwards goes away, they're having a fire sale. So then you can go and get the Go Bears. You can go and get other guys. So
We'll
there's
go Bears
time
already
to make
gone.
there's time to make these moves for the Spurs, and all of them have seen what Wemby is, and maybe that's what makes San Antonio like, hey, this guy had zero help. He had people who were taking shots when they shouldn't have been. They weren't bought in. They didn't. They wanted to be superstars because the spotlight was there, and they thought it was their chance to shine. Well, let's go buy into this now.
So speaking of owners, since we talked about the Clippers, and I know he's no longer an owner of this team, but we mentioned Luca, and I think we have to talk about the Mavs. We have to
I,
simply because of Mark Cuban and this guy's obsessive nature to want to win. I know they had a little couple of growing pains here and there, but since he's become the owner and he's been part of the team, they've been relatively competitive every single season. They've gone out, they had Dirk for so long, they've got Luca. Luca is the kind of player who I think could be the best player on a title team and possibly be a dynasty type of player if he gets the right players around him. Go ahead.
So Luca is going to be just Dirk reincarnated. He's going to stay there because I don't think there's anyone who wants to leave the Mavs, right? If you're Cuban's guy, you're not going. I mean, you can relate to this. It's Ramadan, right? And everybody knows Kyrie Irving is fasting, practicing this, and I believe it was you who sent it to me. But they talk about the things that owners do, and when he was in Brooklyn and fasting, when sunset, they gave him a banana. That was it. The Nets organization said, "Oh, okay, here you go. You got to come to practice. You got to come to these games. All right, you haven't eaten all day. Well, now you can eat. Here's a banana." And Mark Cuban is having a chef fly around with the team and go wherever the team is to have meals prepared for him, ready to go. And it's just a different level of ownership. And I mean, yeah, Kyrie Irving can buy his own banana, he can buy his own chef, he can do all these things, but it's the perks, it's the things that make teams or players happy with teams and ownership. And I mean, they have these rankings, and every year the players union goes through and they rate things. And I just think that Cuban is that type of guy who does more for his team to make them happy, that kind of goes unnoticed. Um, and he wants to build these things. I just think, unfortunately, he's the type of guy that latches on to players and isn't really out scouring because he doesn't want to get rid of guys. I mean, look what he did for Delonte West, right? He keeps them around, he gives them opportunities, and he doesn't, if you're there, you're there. He doesn't seem like the guy who really wants to fire people and move on. He wants to make it work with what he has. And it worked one season. He got it with Dirk. Dirk played out of his mind.
Well,
I,
he did get rid of Porzingis, which I think
yeah.
difficult decision to make. However, it was the right decision to make at the time. So I don't think he's afraid of doing things like this.
No, but I think he wants to win with what he has. And he's the guy who you go to 24-hour fitness and you have a pickup game and you get blitzed, right? And they're like, all right, well, let's switch up the teams. And he's the guy that like, no, I'm gonna win with this team. You take,
They,
and he's gonna take his
they,
guy and just run it back and run it back and run it back. And then he's gonna get his one.
that's me.
And everyone's gonna love him for that one. I mean, that Dallas championship where Dirk played out of his mind and ran through literally every single superstar.
You know what though?
It's
Dirk played out of his mind, but I feel like so many people forget some of the other players and what they did
oh
in
yeah, I mean they had
like
great
Asia was
players.
shooting out of his mind. I think the guy was shooting like 60% from deep, like
Yeah,
60% from deep through the playoffs. Jason Terry, same thing, out of his mind shooting. Jason Kidd,
Jason Kidd.
like
Yeah,
aged back like 5 years just for that playoff run. Tyson Chandler was clogging the paint, and Brendan Haywood, who came off the bench for him, was clogging the paint. They had a agreed upon system where everybody bought in. Sean Marion was going back and guarding every great player on the perimeter and doing all the right things. I think people forget just because those guys were older. Dude, Mike, I have to go look at that roster again because I don't think people realize how good that team was. As great as Dirk
I was gonna
was,
say you're missing like some pretty big names that played good for that one trip, right?
yeah, there's
I
more.
know
Yeah, that's
Corey Brewer, Karam Butler.
yep.
So I'm not going to give
There
Sasha
was there was
Jason Terry, JJ Barea, and he
AJ
was
Brea,
going
and also
home.
they had Deshaun Stevenson, who was another great perimeter defender. He's a starting shooting guard for that team.
Yeah,
The
they
team
had some
was,
depth. They had
yeah.
good talent, and they played great. But that's what
So
it takes, and that unfortunately is what I think is going to happen with Luca. I think
sharpshooter Steve Novak was on that team too.
they're going to get a roster together that's good enough and put together an incredible run. And Luka's going to go on an incredible run with good support and get his ring, and that's going to be it. I don't think that they're going to be a dynasty because I don't think that he is that type of owner where he's just going to bring in guys, move on, and say, okay, you're not what I need. I need the next guy. You're not what I need. I need the next guy.
So
He's
I
not going
agree
to
with
plug and
that.
play like
I
that.
agree with that. But one thing that Dirk really did not have, and he had it with Nash for a time period, but Nash wanted out, and that was kind of an issue with that team. But Dirk really never had that number two. And I really feel like Kyrie is a really good number two next to Luca. I feel like that team is just a number three away from being there. Um, they still have really good movable pieces. Like you just mentioned, like you mentioned Cat. I don't think Cat's the right fit, but like uh, they're the kind of team where a number three could pop up that like comes to that team and they're right there then. They could compete with anybody in a situation that were to occur like that. So I wouldn't count them out just because they're starting to formulate a roster that has a lot of flexibility. They have the young piece in Lively, who I'm really, really fond of, where if you move one of those other guys, you can have him in a year or two fill in that role to replace the player that was lost and adjust some of the roster. So I think the flexibility of that team, and I actually think that a lot of this has to do with when Mark Cuban decided he no longer wants to be an owner, he wants to actually run the team, and I think that that might have been the change that the team needed to move forward. So I definitely think you should keep that in mind as well because the roster for flexibility, if they were to decide to make a trade, they are absolutely capable and they get a number three that could literally catapult them into this conversation.
So let's and I know we weren't going to make this one too long, but if we go through, um,
Well, do you
we
want to
can.
talk a little more about San Antonio because Wemby's the last guy on this list.
No, I think that I think that there's not much more to say about San Antonio other than they need to have somebody, and that's kind of where I was gonna want to finish this up while everybody's clicking the like button and hitting subscribe. Just picking players from other teams that could go and create dynasties, right? Because I think a lot of these teams left. You're kind of past the point of dynasty, right? The 76ers, they're not going to be a dynasty with who they have. Could Embiid be that missing piece that goes to Dallas and finish his career there and become something? You scroll down and you look at the New Orleans Pelicans. For as much as, and I'm going to use the word hate, but I know you don't really hate on him that much. But as much as you hate on Zion, could Zion find a place where he's the right fit and become a dynasty, part of a dynasty? Maybe not the dynasty player, but part of a dynasty. Could
Part of a
Ingram
dynasty, yes. I just
could
don't think
Ingram go to a third team and become, part of a dynasty? Because
that to me is more realistic.
I don't think New Orleans is ever going to be a dynasty.
I agree.
Sacramento, could Sabonis go somewhere else and get to that part where he's part of a dynasty? Could he be the missing piece in Dallas? Um, Phoenix, I think Devin Booker's going to build his career there. I don't think they're ever going to be a dynasty. What they put together is
Does
just
Devin Booker ever win the title?
no, no.
Yeah.
There's always. I mean, that can be the next topic. There's always in every decade and every time period great players or good players. I don't know if you want to say Devin Booker's great yet, but that have long careers that just don't win. John Stockton never won a championship. He's one of the best point guards to ever play basketball, right? There's guys that are just Charles Barkley. There's guys that are great, phenomenal players that just never find the right fit or can never get over the hump.
Does Tyrese
Um,
Halliburton ever win a title?
Halliburton's going to move from the Pacers. He'll be somewhere.
I think
Does he win a title? It just depends where he goes. If he chases
kind of
money,
reminds
no.
me of Jason Kidd type of player. Like he's going to be fun and exciting, and he might like lead a team maybe to an Eastern Conference Finals or something like that. I don't think he'll ever win, but maybe he ends up on a situation where he's Jason Kidd to a Dirk, and in a situation where he is a loaded team in an older age and wins a title. But I don't think he really won.
Does Sangoon go somewhere? Is he the missing piece in Dallas? Is Manchero the missing piece in Dallas? I mean, there's a lot of people on a lot of decent teams that can go be really good somewhere or could be that missing piece.
So
And I
the
think
one
that
name that actually I think you have to talk about because he's not a number one player, but I know he's going to be available. I know he's going to want out. And I think he's the first guy who's going to want out from this group. Say it, Mike.
I was going to say LaMelo Ball.
LaMelo Ball's up there too, but I think Donovan Mitchell's first in line too.
Donovan Mitchell's already tried. He's already tried to go
I
somewhere
think
else.
I think he's going out somewhere else too.
But
He's made
but where's he a
it
fit? Where's he that missing piece?
Miami. Like we have to think about Jimmy Butler, and Jimmy Butler is in a situation where he is starting to age, and he's not going to be the number one player on a team anymore. He's going to kind of have to revert to a Drew Holiday type role on a team. And I honestly feel like I said this before. Like I know Donovan Mitchell wanted to go to the Knicks. He made it blatantly obvious he wants to go to the Knicks. I think he's going to end up being a Miami Heat. The Heat have pieces to make that deal work, and I feel like if Donovan Mitchell is there with Bam and Jimmy Butler turns into like your number three, that team could be a spoiler, not a dynasty type roster, but he's the kind of guy who can go somewhere and help the team win. He might even come to the Lakers, and maybe that's like that point of LeBron's able to take a step back and have a perimeter ball handler who could take over a game for him and help AD. It,
Yeah, I mean, if we ever have an overrated um, episode, AD is going to be pretty high up there
I
for
know
me.
how you feel about him. I know how you feel about him.
He's a really good player. He is not a leader.
I don't
Um,
think he is either. And so my whole thing is like, who do you have that could be a number one ahead of him?
yeah, I do think that the Lakers as constructed aren't going to be a dynasty. I think we've talked about age enough. They're old enough. LeBron can't be the go-to guy, right? Could he take a step back if they found somebody? Maybe.
Although
But
I
you're
don't know if you
still not
watched
talking. You're still
tonight,
not talking dynasty. Say it again.
tonight's game without LeBron was amazing.
They uh, there was two triple doubles, two guys with double doubles. I mean,
2020 double.
AD, but that's the problem with AD. That's one of the reasons I don't. He can go off for what do you have, 35 and 22 with four
Mhm.
blocks, including two game saving. And then tomorrow he'll put up, 15 and 2, right? He's just not consistent. So I don't think the Lakers are building a dynasty anytime soon. I think they've got a lot more.
Yeah, I wasn't referring to that. I
No,
was more
I know you are. I know.
players that could help change a dynasty that are coming available. And LaMelo Ball is one of those guys as well. I think he's going to want out of his situation, and he's going to have to wait it out, unfortunately.
Well, now he's going to have to prove he can stay healthy
Right.
because he got hurt, and once his brother got hurt, he was down for the count, right? So guilty by association. There, he's going to have to show that he can still be a uh, impact player.
Aside from those guys, I truthfully that we just talked about, I truthfully don't see any other player that you could say could be on a possible move that could be a game changer for a dynasty type team, at least from the standpoint of a box office game changer. Like there might be someone like an Aaron Gordon type of player who comes in and plays a role, accepts a role that changes everything for a team the way that he did for Denver. But I don't really see any big name player that, we all kind of agreed how we felt about Zach LaVine, who's a big name, but isn't really a game changer or a title
Yeah,
winner.
I mean, Lillard's probably going to be on the move. I don't see Milwaukee letting
He's
go of
too old.
Giannis.
At this point, he's too
No,
old.
that's what I'm saying. Could he go be that extra? Could he go be that Jason Kidd and turn the clock back for a playoff series? That's not dynasty mode, but it's spoiler, right? Um, but yeah, could Embiid go somewhere and be that extra piece?
Giannis, too, honestly. If Lillard bails, I think Giannis is going to want out.
Yeah, but didn't Giannis just sign a contract?
All he has to do is demand a trade
Yeah,
publicly, get
yeah,
final words,
yeah,
and then
that's true. Yeah, yeah, that's today's NBA, right? You can get out. That's very true.
right.
Um, but no, I think outside of those five teams, I don't think that's anyone is dynasty ready, right? It's going to be more than 5 years for any other team, in my opinion, besides those teams that we mentioned to become a dynasty. Because even if, let's say tomorrow, at the end of this year, Dallas gets two guys and becomes, the odds to win. If they win 1 year, it's a fluke. If they win 2 years, they're on their way. 3 years, you start talking dynasty.
Right.
So you're at least 4 years away from any of the teams. I think that aren't those Denver, Boston. Um,
Well, they're in that category too, Mike. Denver has one, but regardless of it, like, like the biggest issue with Denver is health. we talked about this earlier in the year, like where you have Michael Porter Jr. who has pretty serious back problems. He misses time pretty consistently. You have Jamal Murray, who's come off of two knee injuries that has affected his career. So they're the kind of team that, although Jokic will always be consistent because of the way he plays, also Aaron Gordon, the way he plays and the role he's accepted, it could affect their title hopes.
Absolutely.
So I think every team, and I think that's what's kind of exciting about this, because this is that point where we realize we're past, those 2010.
Oh yeah, we're past the Warriors dynasty's over.
Yeah, those are gone, and those players at this point they might, maybe one of them accepts a role on a different team and maybe somehow pulls off another title. It won't be as the face of a franchise anymore.
No,
So,
I completely agree with you. I think that we're at a place where we're passing the torch, and like I said, it can be the beginning of that Denver dynasty or Boston, but they'd have to keep it up for 2, 3 years um, for anyone to even consider it. I think Denver's the closest because they could do it in 2 years. If they win this year and they win again next year, then people are going to say, okay, this is a dynasty. If you three-peat, you're a dynasty, right? Um, but there's a lot of teams that are in the way of that. So I think we're more getting into that back and forth. Is it the Spurs? Is it the Lakers? Is it Golden State? Is it a couple players? Is it, a LeBron guy who's there consistently but just can't get it every year? Is it the bad boy Pistons? Is it the Houston Rockets for a couple years that just kind of are glimmers and then fade away, right? I think that's more where we're at, unless one of these guys or teams get it going and become that. So it's going to be fun to watch. I mean, for as much as the NBA, in my opinion, needs to make some changes and maybe rule changes, maybe get a little more physical and a little more defensive. It's fun to watch teams develop. It's fun to see these ebbs and flows, and teams come up and then teams fall off, and who can get what, and then new conspiracies, right? Maybe somehow San Antonio gets the #1 draft pick and they draft Bronny #1 and then they get LeBron and all of a sudden I know, I'm just saying that all these things and then everyone wants to go to San Antonio. Some new thing could happen. And it's fun to watch. It's fun to see.
definitely is fun to see. I'm excited for the future of the NBA. I'm not crazy about all the rules they have in place and allowing teams to score 180 points in a game, but
Yeah, there's
hopefully we
way
adjust
too
some of those
much.
so we see so we actually get to see defensive situations that'll actually even benefit Wemby even more moving forward, or even defensive situations that will showcase just how good Luka is offensively compared to the rest of the league and Jokic as well. So I'm excited for it, and yeah, I think it's very interesting to see. And I know there's some of these young guys who've grown up with LeBron and with Steph and who have them on pedestals where they think their legacies will never die and are probably depressed right now, realizing after our show that it's happening. Um, but I think the NBA will be okay.
Yeah, I don't. I think it's growing, and I'm not worried about the NBA at all. I do always like to point out that we would always love more people engaging with the show. Comment, tell us if we missed your team, or if you think somebody else could be a dynasty, or there's somebody that we completely skipped over because we're only two guys with two opinions. Omar's not here to give us hot takes on crazy guys like, oh, Trey Young's on his way to be the best player of all time.
Well, Omar
Or
never said that.
I know, I'm just giving an example. He said Taj Gibson was going to come back and, you know, be on a title contending team. So
By the
you
way,
never know what's out there.
we're at 96 subscribers for so four more. You will be wearing that Kobe jersey. So get ready.
Maybe that's maybe a Kobe jersey in a new location.
Yeah, exactly. New location, live,
There you go.
live at my place.
Somebody's got to subscribe.
Yeah, live at my place. We'll have pizza. It'll be a shit show for sure.
Look at that. Zico's cussing already thinking about it.
Yeah. All right, Mike. Thank you for tonight. And like Mike said, everybody like and subscribe, and we will see you guys all next week.
Have a good one.
All right.